This is Duke University.
When I was going to school in Los Angeles, I would go to art history classes, which I loved, and they would show slide shows like this, and we would talk about the paintings. When I was in Paris, I would go to the Louvre and stand in front of the actual paintings, and I was really amazed by the scale of them and the grandiosity of them and the theatricality, especially of French Romantic paintings from the 1800s. I thought, well, maybe I could do some paintings about surfing because I don't think anyone really does that. So then I thought, well, let me look and see how people are depicting surfing already. So I was looking at things like this in popular culture and paintings like this that you would find in like beachside towns. And I thought, these paintings are nothing like my day-to-day life as being a surfer living in the big city, where I wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning and drive across town on really crowded freeways and get to the beach where it's cold and foggy and go surfing with one or two friends. And so then I thought, well, this isn't right. So I started remembering all the paintings I had seen when I was studying in Europe. And I thought, let me look, how did they paint the ocean back in those days? And I started looking at these amazing paintings. I just was remembering the paintings and looking at these paintings from school. And I decided what I'm going to do is I'm just going to steal from these paintings or copy these old paintings and turn them into paintings about surfing. So I took the Raft of the Medusa and turned it into Surfing at Malibu. And Watson and the Shark, and another California surfing painting. After a couple of years doing the surfing paintings, I started to become more interested in my neighborhood that I was living in the city, in the other things I was doing besides at the beach. So I carried on with this same idea of looking at the classical paintings that I had studied in school and thinking about how to update them to make them interesting to our times. So I started doing paintings of drug deals going on in my neighborhood and drive-by shootings and gang wars. This is a painting from the American Revolution, which I turned into a drive-by shooting in my neighborhood. You can see that's the skyline of LA as seen from the south from the neighborhood I was living in. This is the Battle of Bunker Hill from the American Revolution, which I turned into another drive-by shooting in Watts. And then these paintings that I was doing were sort of imaginary scenes. It wasn't an actual drive-by shooting. It was an imaginary scene. But then the real events of the city started catching up to me. This is my version of the police arresting Rodney King. So it's a portrait of William Powell and Stacey Coons, two of the 4 police officers that were caught on video beating Rodney King. And they went to trial, and they were acquitted, which set off the Los Angeles riots in 1992, which became the worst riots in the United States. They lasted for 4 days. So these were sort of the course of ideas and things that I had been doing. I graduated from school. I started doing paintings about surfing. Then I started doing paintings about my neighborhood. And then there was this weird moment where events became important, and I started struggling with this idea of making history paintings, an idea which doesn't really exist. In the 1800s, history painting was a big thing, and nowadays it doesn't exist. So I was thinking, could I be a history painter? Is it possible for paintings to record history in the era of television and MTV and things? When I was searching around this time, trying to think of a new project, I became really interested in American landscape painting, grandiose representations of the West and California as being, sort of American paradise, where you could pick the oranges off the trees and find gold in the ground, and it was always sunny and warm. And this whole romanticism about California and the West as Eden in America or something. At some point, I'm driving around in my normal life, and the radio's on in the car, and I just hear it said, like on the radio, that someone said how California is the most incarcerated population on Earth. And that sentence just like struck me. I was like, wait a second. I'm looking at all these things for several weeks about California being the Garden of Eden, the paradise, like everyone go west and make it wonderful. And 150 years after the gold rush, now it's the most incarcerated people on planet Earth. And I thought, that's just remarkable. How did that happen? I don't know anything about prisons. I never really think about them. And I thought maybe I should think about prisons. Maybe I should see a prison. So I began a project where I said to myself that I'm going to paint a picture of every prison in California. And I thought, that's all right. What could there be, like 8, 10? I found out there's 32 state prisons in California. There's 8 federal penitentiaries in California. And there are countless state and city jails and things. So I set out to paint every state prison in California. It took me 3 years, but I would look up the address of them and I would drive out and see whatever I could see. And ironically, the prisons are in remote locations and they're often in places that I could actually find old landscape paintings of because they were such beautiful places. Maybe 15 years ago, I was invited by this place, the Hui Noeau Visual Art Center. It's an art school in Maui. So they hired this printmaker named Paul Maloney, and he came in. He's a really well-known printmaker, and stumbled in his books on a series of prints by Jacques Collot, who was a Belgian artist in the 1600s. And he did this really remarkable series of etchings that are about the size of a dollar bill. This one is one of them. And I think it was 18 etchings, and they told the course of the 30 Years' War in Europe. And I was looking at these, and I said, hey, Paul, what if we use these as a basis to do a series of prints about the war in Iraq, which was going on at that time, the second war in Iraq? And my wife said, no, I have a better idea. Instead of doing little things based on little things, why don't you do something really big based on these little things? These 4x8 sheet pieces of plywood, and set about doing a series of prints about the war in Iraq. Again, with the idea of telling the story of the war, how it started to where it was going, and at that point we didn't have any idea how it would end. But we ended up doing a series of 15 prints about the war in Iraq. Just like in Collot's series, things started to go wrong in the war in Iraq. The Americans started rounding everyone up and taking them off to camps. The images from Abu Ghraib were released. The uprisings went on. The war dragged on. And finally, the execution of Saddam Hussein. So then while I was back in LA, I started doing a series of paintings about the war in Iraq also that went along with this series. So this is my painting called The Liberation of Baghdad. And it's not meant as a depiction of the true liberation. It's a depiction of what we were told was going to happen by Donald Rumsfeld, that the American troops would roll easily into Baghdad and the people would come running out of the houses with flowers and boxes of chocolates and be so happy that we liberated them. And this is my painting, The President's Dream, with George Bush flying on a magic carpet and bringing liberty to the people. And down here you see Baghdad on fire. This project is what led to the book, which I'm going to skip over. But yeah, just really briefly, for 2 years I was working on these series of prints about the Iraq War. I was following it every day. I was reading about it, reading about this whole American discussion going on about what is Islam? Is Islam fundamentally at odds with Western civilization? Is it a violent religion? Is it a clash of East versus West? And so one day I just went down the street and bought a copy of the Qur'an in the bookstore and started reading it. And of course, the Qur'an was nothing like I would have thought. It was, if you open the Qur'an at any page and start reading, your first impression is that it's just remarkably familiar. And I started reading the Qur'an, reading more about the Qur'an, and eventually came to this idea, this crazy idea, that maybe I could make an illuminated manuscript of it. I thought it would take me 4 years, and it ended up taking me 9 years. I finished that project about 2 years ago. People often ask me, what have I been doing since? What I've been doing since is, at some point, I got a residency at the Smithsonian Institute in Washington, D.C. So this disconnect between the way that the colonial America is supposed to represent D.C., where D.C. is like a functioning center. And so it led me to do this. And so I decided to make an artwork with the text of the Constitution so that everyone could read it, like me. So it's imagined as like a giant Arc de Triomphe sort of structure. And this is the entire text of the Constitution. The center is the Bill of Rights. And these are all the amendments with a little bit of space to add some new ones when they get around to it. And you can see this side is still under construction with cranes and things. But not only is it a structure, but it's also an apartment building. And so these are like windows to apartments. And it's sort of like daily American life is happening. From there I went on. Here's the view of the Bill of Rights. And there's scenes of, there's little scenes that go along with each of the 10 things that show our life today, how they affect us. And from that, I've carried on, and I guess I've become interested through the Qur'an project, through other things, of the idea of looking at text, especially sort of important but forgotten text, and trying to bringing them back to attention and creating this whole series of monuments to important documents from world history. So this is the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. This is a monument to the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo that ended the Mexican-American War. An imaginary monument to the trickle-down theory of economics. There's like a snowy mountain and skiing and golf courses and beautiful waterfalls, and it's all going to this dam where it barely trickles down, and it gets down to below where it's all just barren desert. This is an imaginary campus of monuments to all the wars of the United States, in which every pillar is a year of the United States beginning with 1776, and written on every pillar is one or two of the countries that we were at war with at the time. The United States has been at war for all but, I think, 32 years out of 240 years.